Welcome everyone to our webinar today on inclusive entrepreneurship. Today we are joined by Tracy Robertson of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, myself, Galen McCluskey of the Tamar Institute, Tamar Huggins of TechSpark, Sandy Kownak of Inspire Nunavut, and Chryssa Koulis of the School of Social Entrepreneurs, Ontario. I want to begin by recognizing that Toronto, which is where we're hosting today's webinar, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Before we dive in today, I'm going to go over a few technical details. First, to reduce noise and distractions, we have you all muted today, so no need to worry about any background noise coming from your line. As well, for those of you who are joining us online, I'll just have you take a look at your GoToWebinar control panel that normally is on the right-hand side of your screen. And take a look at the bottom and you'll see a question box. If you run into any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, feel free to type into this box, and my colleague Jack, who's joining us on the line as well, will be there to help you. We're also going to be opening up the last 10 to 15 minutes of today's webinar for Q&A, so please type in any questions you have for the presenters in the question box throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to make sure we answer them at the end. No need to be shy, we really love to hear from you. If you're calling into this webinar on the phone, you unfortunately do not have these features. However, if you do have questions, you're still welcome to email them to Jack, and you can reach Jack by email at jack, J-A-C-K, at tamarackcommunity.ca, TAMARACCOMMUNITY.ca. Okay, so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Tracy Robertson, who can share a bit of background on inclusive entrepreneurship and Ontario Trillium Foundation and some of the work that they're doing today.
Thanks, Galen. Hi, everyone. As Galen mentioned, I'm Tracy Robertson. I'm with the Ontario Trillium Foundation. The last couple of years, I've been leading the strategy for, it's called Prosperous People Action Area, and that action area is within a broader investment strategy that we have, and we're partnering today with Tamarack. So thanks so much, Galen, for facilitating this conversation and working with us on the webinar. We have a real interest, of course, in entrepreneurship. We know that we all know that entrepreneurship is a driver for the economy. It is also one of our areas within that Prosperous People Action Area that we support. We support entrepreneurs, startup businesses, and other kind of ecosystems and incubators, etc. We do that through our granting strategy, and we also do it through our Youth Opportunities Fund as well at Ontario Trillium Foundation. So we have a real interest, of course, in the entrepreneurship field, but we also recognize that fostering diversity and inclusion is integral to creating an economy that works for everyone. The full and equal participation of underrepresented groups or groups that are often outside of this ecosystem are essential for future prosperity. So we wanted to have a kind of open up this conversation, and we recognize there's a number of research articles that are emerging and work from Brookfield Institute, for instance, and others that are looking at this whole area of innovation and inclusion. We were interested then to have a conversation about this whole landscape, and we've really wanted to understand a little bit more about how entrepreneurs that are from kind of underrepresented communities or communities that are Indigenous or people who are racialized and other groups, how they experience maybe cultural biases that underpin many of the challenges that we face and that they face and shape their experiences as entrepreneurs.
What do you recommend?
So we've invited three really interesting female entrepreneurs and people who have been experienced in this landscape, and we really are looking at how can we foster and create the conditions to embrace a diverse ecosystem and support people across the landscape. So I will we'll pass that on to Galen at this point, and so he can introduce our panelists who are, thank you for being here today, all of our panelists and the people coming on to the webinar, and Galen can facilitate an interesting conversation. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Tracy. And yes, as you mentioned, I'm really excited about the panel that we have today. So we, as you mentioned, have three very different entrepreneurs who have all sorts of different experiences, and I'm fantastically excited to kind of dive in and hear each of your stories. I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the three people we have as today's speakers. So first, Tamar Huggins is an award-winning social entrepreneur, author, and tech education trailblazer, whose work is featured exclusively on Blavity, BET, Black Enterprise, CBC, CP24, and the Huffington Post, to name a few. After helping Black and female tech founders raise over $1.1 million to launch their tech startups in Canada, Tamar realized the importance for young girls and children of color to see positive reflections of themselves within the tech industry. In 2015, Tamar launched Tech Spark, Canada's first technology and design school committed to empowering girls and children of color through innovative tech education. As a result of her endeavors, Tamar was named the Harry Jerome Young Entrepreneur and honored as one of 100 Black women to watch in 2015. In 2017, Tamar was honored as Canada's top 150 Black women creating impact across the nation by CBC and Her Story in Black. Despite being told a Black woman would never be successful in tech, Tamar raised six-figure investments for TechSpark, educated over 1,400 youth in under 2 years, and is on track to educate 70,000 youth by 2022. Welcome, Tamar.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Next up is Sandy Kownak. Sandy is the managing director of Inspire Nunavut, an organization that operates a social entrepreneurship training program and accelerator for youth across the territory. Its purpose is to build capacity within Inuit youth to create enterprises that integrate Inuit culture and values, increase community and economic development, and are increasing their community standard of living. Sandy is also a founding member and current president of the Nunavut Deaf Society and is a founding member of Ablukta, a community social enterprise in Baker Lake that operates a thrift store and food bank. Sandy lives in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and also has a public sector background working for NTI as well as territorial and federal governments. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you for inviting me and letting me participate today.
Absolutely, thanks for joining us. And lastly, we have Chryssa Koulis. Chrissa thinks of herself like Goldilocks, but without the three bears. She earned her BSc from the University of Toronto in psychology and criminology and assumed she would be content to work in the nonprofit sector. However, after working at both the Hospital for Sick Children and the University of Toronto, she felt something was missing, so she went back to school to get an MBA from the Schulich School of Business. She quickly realized that she did not fit into that world either and wasn't sure what she was looking for until she heard about the School for Social Entrepreneurs and joined the first Canadian cohort. At the school, she was able to bring her business degree together with her desire to make a positive social impact, and she launched her social enterprise, Sidekicks, that provides opportunities for people that face barriers to employment to gain experience in impact organizations while the organizations benefit from a plethora of experience by incorporating sidekicks into their workforce as needed. This finally felt right, so Chrissa became the managing director of the School for Social Entrepreneurs in 2018 and has been unlearning what that means since then. She's also a Canadian catalyst for the League of Entrepreneurs and also serves on the board of North York Community House. Welcome, Chrissa. All right, so that was a brief introduction to all of our speakers, but I wanted to give a bit of an opportunity for each of you to tell us a bit more about yourself, and particularly why the topic today is meaningful to you. So tell us a bit about yourself and why entrepreneurship that's inclusive is important to you. Sandy, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I'm a mother of a deaf son in Nunavut. Nunavut's very young. It's only 20 years old. Brand new territory. We just celebrated that about not even a month ago. So in the last, definitely the last 20 to 30 years in preparation for creating a new territory, Inuit have been very interested in building local capacity, and definitely as a parent of a deaf child, that was a huge concern for myself. So as you mentioned in my bio, one of the social enterprises I'm involved in is the Nunavut Deaf Society, which is basically an opportunity to problem solve local capacity issues around deaf Inuit experiencing education, accessing healthcare or other services that any government should provide. Definitely one of my areas where I dedicate a lot of my time to participate in helping problem solve capacity issues for a new territory. As well, with us being a new territory in our country, a huge factor that plays into being involved in areas such as entrepreneurship is we have a very high number of youth. Our youth probably represent about 30% or more of our young population. So this is youth 15 and under. And definitely we are impacted by unemployment rates, about 15%. So it's definitely something we need to work on here is build those local capacities, opportunities to support our young population become fully functional self territory.
Great, thank you. And I really look forward to hearing more about your work with youth, particularly and what that means in your context. Really excited to have you on the line. Chrissa, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Galen. And thank you for inviting me to participate. I was on mute before, so I couldn't thank you. But as you mentioned, I often describe myself as Goldilocks without the three bears. And I should clarify, without the golden locks either. It's more in reference to my journey professionally and personally and to find the right place for me. So somewhere I feel that I fit in. So I'll tell you a little bit about where I grew up. It was a very diverse part of Toronto called Flemington Park. And my parents are immigrants from Greece. And we were very isolated from the family because they were the only ones in North America. So when I growing up, I was just really connected to the community around us. And I loved where I grew up. And it wasn't until later in life when I realized how the outside world viewed my community, with names like Priority Neighborhood and, stuff like that. But for me, I just had great memories. And there's one experience that really stood out for me. It sticks out in my mind. And I think it's maybe why I feel so strongly about inclusive entrepreneurship. So we were young. We didn't get to go on a lot of class trips. But when I was 8, we had the opportunity to go to camp for a few days. But each kid had to raise enough money for the trip by selling Florida grapefruits and oranges. So at the age of 8, they expected us to be entrepreneurial. And for the most part, it wasn't really the kids that would actually be selling the Florida grapefruits and oranges, but it would be their parents. So anybody's family who had a small business, they could sell to their customers or vendors or suppliers. But for most of the kids in my community, this was just another opportunity that was just outside their reach. And I was really struck with how unfair that was. So even though I had no desire to go to camp, like I said, my parents were Greek immigrants, so camping wasn't really in our blood. I just became obsessed with selling grapefruits and oranges because I thought it was just so unfair, and the system was completely unfair and rigged against us. Um, and we were very fortunate. We had a family friend who owned a specialty tea shop, and one of the locations was the RBC Tower downtown, like in prime, like the financial part of Toronto. And through them, we sold enough Florida grapefruits and oranges for the entire class to go camping for 2 years in a row. And I knew back then at 8 years old that there was no way it would have been as great an experience if everybody wasn't able to go. So I saw at a very young age the benefits of entrepreneurship, but I also saw, at 8 years old, the barriers for some people as well. And so there's a real connection for me personally back to my childhood from that experience to then being a student at the School for Social Entrepreneurs and now managing it. So I think that story gives you a sense of why inclusive entrepreneurship is so important to me.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm curious to delve into a bit more of what you've learned since those early childhood experiences to now. As much as we can cover in a 1 hour webinar.
Yeah.
So thank you. Tamar,
Hi.
hi. Would you like to give us a little bit of an introduction and tell us about why this topic is important to you?
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Tamar Huggins, and I'm a mother. I'm an entrepreneur of 9 years now, and I'm also an author, and I'm also a very strong community advocate. I grew up in Brampton, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto, and I grew up in an upper middle class community, went to a good school, came from a family of entrepreneurs as well. And for me, as I entered into high school, I started to meet other individuals from different community members, different communities, and I had the wonderful opportunity to make friends with individuals who had different learning experience than I did, who had different living experiences than I did. And for me, being able to step outside of what was comfortable for me and what I was used to, and going into communities and experiencing things through the lens of someone who would live in a quote unquote priority neighborhood, for me, it was enlightening, and it really struck a chord with me as well to be able to see how other individuals were living and to know that there's better out there, and for me to really feel that there's something that I should or could do to make things better. I do feel that education and opportunity is something that everyone should have access to, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their culture, regardless of their race. And for me, it was really about how do we provide support to those who would be considered the quote unquote underdog. And so growing up, I always had a soft spot for young people who felt that the world and adults around them were giving up on them before they even really got a chance to start their life. And for me, it was really about how can we create systems that will support these groups who many call underrepresented, but I'd like to say underestimated, children of color and young girls, and how can we create systems that actually support them? And what type of work can we do to dismantle the systems that have been set up to destroy them or to oppress them? And so for me, my work with TechSpark actually started out as Driven Accelerator, which was Canada's first technology accelerator for women, people of color, and newcomers. And the goal was to really give a platform or a voice to those who were often unheard, and to give them an opportunity to learn from the best of the best, for them to be able to speak about their business, to be able to get training, mentorship, and of course, capital for their organization. And we did that for about 2-3 years. And after we realized that in order for us to really create social impact, we had to really start at a young age. And so I came back to, my passion and my love, which was young people, and creating TechSpark Canada, which is Canada's first and only technology and design school that's really focused on empowering young girls and children of color through innovative, equitable, and culturally responsive tech education. So looking at how we can infuse the culture that these young people know and that they are accustomed to, and infusing that in education so that they want to learn and they're engaged and they feel like, the teachers understand them and are speaking their language, essentially. So this has been a long process for me. My journey started out with OTF. OTF is our biggest supporter and funder. And without their support, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I give thanks for that. It's been an amazing journey for me. I've learned more about myself as an individual and as a professional. And I'm very proud of the work that we're doing in the communities right now.
Great, thank you, and thank you for joining us. Yeah, I'm just so excited by some of the themes that are already starting to come up in the conversations we've been having, and I think particularly, highlighting what you said, Tamar, around supporting the underestimated. I feel like was something that came up in lots of different ways in what people were sharing, and I think we've alluded to this in some of our thoughts around the first question. I'd like to dive right into the challenging questions. So this one that I'm really curious for all of you to weigh in on is, what are some of the main barriers for diverse groups, particularly the ones that you work with, in becoming entrepreneurs? I'd love if you could share a little bit more of what you're seeing as the barriers towards entrepreneurship for the groups that you work with. Tamar, would you like to kick us off with that, since you were just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I would say, from what we've seen when I started working with entrepreneurs back in 2012, the biggest challenge was access and visibility. Because tech entrepreneurship is dominated by white males, it's very challenging for anyone else who doesn't look like Mark Zuckerberg to get the attention, like serious attention, from venture capitalists, from angel investors, etc. And so one of the things that we aimed to do was create a community that was a safe space for entrepreneurs to come and ask questions, learn, grow, and really put themselves, like the best versions of themselves, out there, and connect them with the investors who, some of them really genuinely want to connect with tech startups that are led by Black founders, that are led by newcomers or women, but they just don't know where to access these people. And then the other side of it is that a lot of investors maybe aren't putting the effort into going into the communities where these underestimated founders reside, or where they are accustomed to being. And so bridging that connection, that gap, is something that we felt really helped the entrepreneurs. So I feel that having access and visibility is probably the biggest challenge, being taken seriously as well. Another challenge as well, from the investor standpoint, looking at it from as an entrepreneur, a lot of investors tend to generally invest in people that they like, which makes sense. And so with the con to that is that if someone who they can't relate to, whether it be their culture is different or their socioeconomic status is different, those things create barriers in our subconscious, and they almost don't really, either they don't give enough, the same amount of money to Black founder as they would to a white founder, or to a male founder as they would to a female founder. And so that creates barriers as well. So I feel that part of the issue from the investor standpoint is that we don't have enough investors that are either interested in underestimated communities and founders, and putting together a pool of money that's geared towards those groups.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Sandy, I'm curious to know, from your context up in Nunavut, what barriers are you seeing? Are they similar to what Tamar was saying, or there's some different ones that are unique to your context?
There's similarities, but as well, definitely the issue of access to technology. Internet, high-speed internet can be a barrier. We try to be very innovative as we're delivering Inspire Nunavut to the youth by using different high-tech platforms. But of course, each student comes with their own barriers. I mean, some have unidentified disabilities. Language Inuktitut is a huge language used in Nunavut. Over 65% Nunavummiut speak Inuktitut, as well as English. And definitely the different stereotypes out there about Inuit or Inuit youth in general, as well as the stigma around just being an Inuk can be a barrier. But we really approach these full force using innovation here at Inspire. But of course, it's an opportunity to do grassroots development for a new territory in a young population where we see lots of policy issues across the board, where local people, local Inuit could do some problem solving, whether they want to start a small business or use the form of social enterprise to tackle food insecurity, training issues, language development, using local resources to innovate and build things and revitalize historical losses such as cultural practices, whether it's through tool development or Inuktitut resource development. So the challenges to me at this point, again, is just the diverse geological separation. We're a huge territory where everything is so expensive. Everything is done by air travel, and Inuktitut is the language. It's just a matter of being able to pull those challenges together by being innovative. Like, the landmass is huge. It's probably the size of the rest of the country, if not 10 times more expensive, but definitely being very resourceful and creative, and tapping into those partnerships to make things move and make things happen, and which, we do problem solve on a daily basis on different factors, but again, it's all about social innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, that's how Inuit have always made it throughout the thousands of years. It's a extreme location, extreme conditions, and it's tapping into that called Inuit Kawimayetokangit. So in a smaller abbreviation I can give you is, we call it IQ. We really tap into that knowledge of how things have been done for thousands of years to get through our youth and get them at a level of a platform where they could pursue entrepreneurship or continue their social enterprise to solve problems.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I so appreciate you also, being on the call to help provide that perspective of, I think sometimes when we have conversations about entrepreneurship, it's easy to think of, big city entrepreneurship, but also hearing some of the unique challenges and then opportunities as well that are present in your context. Just fantastic to add to the conversation. So thank you. Chrissa, anything you'd like to add on this question?
Sure. I think basically I'm going to echo a lot of what Tamar and Sandy said. So for us, what we see is really as a main barrier to becoming an entrepreneur for diverse groups is access. So a lack of access to programs that are inclusive and accessible is one lack of access that we see. So there are a lot of programs out there, not enough around social entrepreneurship, but regardless, most programs are closed off. If you think of all the money that was given to universities and colleges for youth entrepreneurship, that's to a very specific community, and people from underrepresented and underestimated groups aren't there. Simply, they are underestimated. So it's very closed off to a lot of people. And even when those programs are open, sometimes we don't realize how much a barrier there is, because we're not taking the point of view of the person who would like to participate and seeing what barriers are facing. So this is something we struggle with at the School for Social Entrepreneurs. We want to be as open and inclusive and accessible in all our programming. And we found that having an online application wasn't enough. So we have different ways that people can apply to our programs. And we have seen that when people go on to online to do the application, a lot of people only put in their name and their phone number, and then there's a drop off. And there are many reasons for this, and we know that. But we know that it's a barrier for some people, so we call them. And it is a much more intensive process to do that, but we know that we would be excluding people if we didn't do that extra step to ensure that we aren't creating a barrier in trying to create a program that is inclusive and accessible. So I think sometimes we don't realize how much our programming is closed off, and how do we make sure that we can see that? And I think that is taking the perspective of people from diverse communities, and having people be represented in the entire process. And not just as a focus group, but actually be involved from start to finish in everything that we're doing. We've already heard about lack of access and the cost of capital. So that's a major barrier. And there's tons of research about this. And, we see this as a constant struggle for the entrepreneurs we work with. Most of them bootstrap their own ventures, and it's a real challenge. We recently we partnered with the Duca Impact Lab, which is new, and they're looking at underbanked entrepreneurs and the support that they can offer them. And what we found is a lot of entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs can't get financing until they're financially secure. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation. And for a lot of the people we work with, they can't really rely on their own personal credit and their personal financial history to be able to bridge that gap for their professional banking needs. So this is a definite, this is a serious concern for, I think, almost every entrepreneur we've ever come across. And the third area I would say is lack of access to diverse networks and supports. It's really hard to navigate a system you don't understand. And for a lot of the people we work with, the entrepreneurial world is a system that is new to them. It's closed off to them in many respects. So I think it's important for all entrepreneurs. I think it's critical for social entrepreneurs to be involved in different networks, to have different support systems. And again, I think that there are times when these supports and these networks are closed, and maybe they're closed informally and not formally, and we don't even realize how people are perceiving them. We had a student he just blew my mind with a story. He talked about how he used to live in a box. There were boundaries where he could go, and it was both a physical thing and a mental model, and he had developed it. And it was so strong, he never saw himself being able to go outside of that box. So that limited his opportunities as a social entrepreneur. And for one of the sessions we did a pitch event downtown at a fancy building, in the finance district. And he said afterwards that he felt that before that experience, he could never see beyond that box. He could never go beyond this box. But going with us into that space, meeting people from different backgrounds than him, showed him that he didn't have to live in that box, and his boundaries were expanded. And so how can we expand our networks? How do we involve and engage different people in all the different networks that we all have? So those are some of the ways I think that a lack of access really provides strong barriers, whether or not they're formal or whether or not they're even seen, but they're actual barriers to people becoming entrepreneurs.
And I think that challenge of them, a lot of these types of barriers being hidden or unseen, I think raises a particular challenge for us to respond to. And I think it dovetails really nicely into the reverse of the last question, where we talked about just laying out, getting out what are the barriers that we're seeing. Many of the people on the call are, either running support services or organizations involved in programs that support entrepreneurs, involved in funding entrepreneurs or organizations that provide these types of supports. And I think it's probably going to be really important for all of them to hear your thoughts on the opportunities that you see around making entrepreneurship more inclusive. So Chrissa, I wonder if you could extend on some of the themes you highlighted, around access, around kind of the lack of, the need for access to diverse relationships and supports, and then also that challenge of these kind of hidden mental models about what's possible. Looking at kind of all of those factors, what do you see are the big opportunities for all of us who are involved to make entrepreneurship more inclusive?
Sure, yeah. I think literally, as you said, every barrier also provides an opportunity. So, lack of access to programming that is inclusive and accessible. Well, I think that we can do things to make it make all the programming that we have inclusive and accessible. I mean, there's a lot of jargon. As I said, online applications pose problems. So I think we have to look at every piece of, program or, or approach to entrepreneurship and see it through the eyes of people with lived experience. And I think the only way you can do that is by increasing their voices, increasing the diversity of voices, having more people be involved that have lived experience, that are from groups that are underrepresented. But not in I think traditionally we've done that a bit in a focus group kind of way. And I think that it has to be more truly co-creation. Having just more people involved will, I think, create greater opportunities and make entrepreneurship more inclusive. But that's a real shift in our thinking. And I think there's a lot we have to unlearn before we get there. And I think at the heart of it, the problem is we're playing a game that is stacked against us. It's, we have to level the playing field a bit, because it's a game that for many of us, we don't even know what the rules are and we don't have all the pieces. And so a lot of what we do at the School for Social Entrepreneurs is help people unlearn so that they can see opportunities where other people see restrictions, barriers, constraints. We're never going to solve the problems that we need to solve if we're still using toolkits from the past. And for us, there's even trying to learn how to play the game, and also just, throwing the game out and playing a new game and creating a different game altogether. And one of the ways that we're looking at doing that and just expanding entrepreneurship beyond the few people that are trying to become entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs is to look at people within organizations already and how they can be entrepreneurial in their mindset. And so we partnered with the League of Entrepreneurs. So an entrepreneur is somebody who is trying to make change from within an established organization. And the training and programming that we do around entrepreneurship it's very similar to what we do with entrepreneurs. It's around expanding our minds, creating an entrepreneurial mindset, unlearning the things that hold us back. And we have found that, especially with youth, they no longer have the one label that I think that we would have in the past of I'm an entrepreneur or I work at an organization, and it's very much more fluid. And so we're seeing a lot of people that are both entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, or they're using their organization as training ground and a little bit of a safety net to test out their idea before then venturing out and starting their own venture.
Mm-hmm.
So, giving people a leg up within an organization, that does provide a bit of a safety net to help deal with some of the lack of access, lack of capital that we might experience when you become an entrepreneur, can help to just level the playing field and just change the game. I think we have to do more of that, just a little bit of blowing things up. Not always a bad thing, especially when it means that more voices will be represented, because I think we'll all benefit. I know we will all benefit from that. So how do we all support that?
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the idea of unlearning a few times. I'm wondering if you could share a bit of what does that look like within the School for Social Entrepreneurs, and what sorts of things are you typically helping people unlearn in
Sure.
in the process you go through?
Sure, and thank you for catching me on jargon. I'm usually pretty good about explaining what I'm saying. So for us, unlearning is not the typical definition of like throwing something away, it's no longer useful, but to really identify how there are things, especially mental models that we have. So the way our brain thinks is to create mental models to make our lives a little bit easier day to day, but the way we think also can pose challenges and create barriers to how we see the world. And so it limits us. Our own brain actually can limit us. So for us, unlearning is trying to help people expand their way of thinking, expand how they see things. And most notably, what we see is people not having to unlearn a lot about their own identity. So most people that come into a program would never identify themselves as a social entrepreneur, despite coming to the school for social entrepreneurs and trying to launch a social venture. They don't identify that way, and so there's a lot of unlearning about some of the things about their identity, some of the deeply held beliefs they have, and confidence, and building their confidence through this unlearning. So that's where we typically focus on, but unlearning is done both at the personal level, interpersonal, and a greater community or societal level.
Great, thank you. Tamar, any things to add on this question? Any any opportunities that Chrissa mentioned that resonate, or any other ones that seem really alive for you in your community?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again for me, please?
Yeah, of course. So the question is, what opportunities do you see to make entrepreneurship more inclusive?
I think in that respect, in terms of opportunities that exist, it's definitely creating more inclusive community spaces. What I find is that whenever we create spaces that speak to the individuals that we're trying to target, we're obviously going to have much more success, higher rates of success. And I think it's important that whatever we're designing, whether it be a product, a service, program, a course, or school, the user or the student needs to be at the center of it. You know, a lot of what organizations do, even though it's well intended, they create things in their own little box or bubble and then parachute it into a community expecting it to work. And then oftentimes it doesn't, because the voice of the person or persons that they're trying to serve was never a part of that design process. So looking into, design thinking, the first step is creating empathy and being able to understand what those problems are, especially if you don't relate to those problems. And then looking at, what currently exists in the space, what's working well, what's not, and using that insight to create something that really works for the community or the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think it's also important to note that whatever it is that we're building, it's something that is always going to iterate. There's always going to be a newer version, a 2.0, a 3.0. There's always going to be updates, because as we go along, as we serve the groups that, we're all serving, we learn more. Their problems may change. They may become more complex. We may, scratch the surface of an entirely new problem. And so we have to be willing as organizations to be able to grow and to be agile in a way where, we can kind of ebb and flow if need be. So I would say definitely the opportunities are there for us, but it really has to start with who we're trying to serve and ensuring that we always have them as part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I think the combination of both of your thoughts, starting with expanding individual perspectives, but then also making sure that the spaces and places and supports that we provide reflect the perspectives of the people who we're actually hoping to support. Sandy, do you have anything to add on opportunities that you see in your community, particularly thinking about some of the barriers that you highlighted as that are more unique to the Nunavut context?
Definitely we're a land isolated by geography, and definitely increase awareness of our barriers nationally would really assist in conversation across the country, talking about our entrepreneurship ecosystem and the things we face, such as shipping. We have a short shipping season from July to October for all our goods. We all have only air travel between communities and out of Nunavut. I guess conversations around how can we improve high-speed internet? How can we possibly look at other technologies or innovations that have been to include them in entrepreneurship? I mean, people want to work in Nunavut. I mean that's enough to say there is a need. Definitely, approximately $1 billion wealth in forms of wages and expenditures and profits earned in Nunavut exit annually with little to no return back to Nunavut. So, which speaks to the high food insecurity issues you may hear across the country about Nunavut. So it's having those conversations with policymakers and programs. I mean, we're highly dependent on governments to support us build our capacities. Those are the kinds of conversations I would think would support improving the opportunities for entrepreneurship in Nunavut, is high-speed internet, shipping, etc.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I like that our conversations around this help to reinforce all the different layers and ways of viewing this, where, Sandy, you took us looking at policy and infrastructure as a critical support, in addition to some of the things that Chrissa and Tamar were saying that are more, at an organizational level or even more at an individual level. And it's one of the things I appreciate about this conversation is that it feels like there are so many layers to making entrepreneurship more inclusive. So the last question that I want to ask, and also would encourage anyone on the line, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in and we'll see if we can get them in. But it's a bit of a personal question for each of you, thinking about what advice you might give, particularly to people in groups that you work with around entrepreneurship. So the question is, what have you learned in your journey that you would like to share with people who might be interested in becoming entrepreneurs, particularly groups that aren't included right now? So you can think about the groups that you're working with. Sandy, would you like to start? Do you have any lessons learned or stories to share about that you might want to share with people who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs, but aren't really sure where to start, or may not feel included, or may not feel it's possible?
Limited technology is here. I mean, we are accessing markets outside of Nunavut. There are innovations happening locally where, you know, it's totally different from the rest of the country, whether it's a product or service. It's about being resourceful and creative and finding solutions, like a quick round for any of our participants. We have to work with a totally different schema of learning entrepreneurship, whereas generally a lot of our what we've learned, I mean, my parents and their parents, was by modeling, learning. Now we're trying to incorporate literacy and numeracy, and so just the there's a different way to do business in Nunavut, and there's opportunities that we haven't even found yet, or maybe had time to talk about yet with each other, but it's really about social innovation. It's about being able to be problem solvers on the minute by the minute, and that's what our students are doing. They're showing so much creativity and unique abilities that I'm very happy to be a part of, like beautiful work that they're creating, arts, it's just amazing what I'm getting to experience on a daily basis on how it's a great opportunity to learn from the North in terms of entrepreneurship. Lots of creativity going on in Nunavut.
Thank you very much. Chrissa, would you like to share any thoughts from, I think this might be a good opportunity to kind of tie back to, your story at the beginning potentially, and just on your journey, what have you learned, and what might you share to people who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs but may not feel included?
I was thinking in answering this question, I was thinking about all the barriers that we face in trying to become entrepreneurs, and so many are external, but the ones that are internal, I think, are the ones that really keep us from reaching our full potential. So I think if you are struggling with that and it's an identity thing, that take that risk, take a chance on yourself. It's a hard route to take, but when I think about it, I think it took me a long time. This is the Goldilocks thing. I tried a lot of different things before getting to where I am. But I think if you are entrepreneurial in nature, if it's your mindset, it's going to come out one way or another. So deal with the internal things that you're dealing with, or get help in terms of that, because there are enough barriers out in the world, but you need to be pretty secure in who you are if you're going to attempt to be an entrepreneur. And there are lots of places where you can get that support. It's just harder to find. But I think you have to deal with that, because if you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's going to happen at some point in your life. Might as well have it happen earlier than later, especially if you're a social entrepreneur. We need people to help solve societal problems now. So that would be that's my learning.
Great, thank you. Tamar?
Yes, so great feedback. I think a lot of what Chrissa said echoes with my journey as well. Trying to penetrate an industry or a problem that doesn't really include individuals who look like me was always a challenge. And I feel that Steve Jobs said that if there's one characteristic that entrepreneurs need to have, it's perseverance. I wholeheartedly believe that, because when entrepreneurs who are born to be entrepreneurs are born problem solvers, and we've been placed on this earth to solve some of the world's toughest challenges and problems, and come up with creative and fresh solutions to those problems. Some of us have been tasked with solving larger problems than others, and I think with that comes a certain skill set. With entrepreneurship, it's a process, it's a journey. It's not a straight line. It's curves, it's bumps, it's diversions and iterations and pivots. And I think that those are the times when people say, well, this is not for me, or they give up. But having that perseverance to be able to push through those challenging times, does really start from within. It does really start with, who you are as a person, how secure you are within yourself. But externally, it also looks like, who are you surrounding yourself with? One of the quotes that I put in my book, Bossed Up, was that you should pay anything to be in the comfort and the presence of influential people, to learn, to grow. It's always a learning process for us. Picking up books and reading, a lot of the great entrepreneurs that we see never went to post-secondary school. They don't have a PhD, they don't have an MBA or any of these things, but they take their time to really learn about their craft and learn about the problem that they're trying to solve before they start doing it. And I think surrounding yourself with education, surrounding yourself with the right people who will support you from a spiritual perspective, from a mental perspective, because entrepreneurship is something that can really drain you mentally and emotionally and even physically. And having, that self-care piece a part of your journey as well, and someone to remind you of that, is also very key. And I think that, being an entrepreneur, as our process in business will often, shift and change, we as individuals will also shift and change. And so that's okay. And I think that people should be okay with knowing that as they get older, more mature, more wise, that their path may direct them into a different area. And that's fine. I feel that everything that we do now is a stepping stone to something much greater, and just to be open to that process and change is something that's really important.
And that, I think that raises an interesting question for me, just based on this theme that came through from all of you around the need for resourcefulness, for persistence, and kind of overcoming your own internal barriers and being, how do you keep from giving up? I think the last question I'd like to put out there, just to see if anyone has any thoughts on, is what can we, all of us on the call as individuals, maybe even, what could we be doing to support and help the entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs in our lives to kind of keep going and avoid giving up and work through some of those barriers that you talked about? I'll just leave that open to anyone if you have any thoughts on what it means to support people who might not have these kinds of access in your own life.
Well, I feel that definitely keeping your story authentic is key. I think that people who want to become entrepreneurs want to be entrepreneurs because of the lifestyle, because of what they see on Instagram or, other social media platforms. But they never see the hustle, they never see the sleepless nights, they never see, the moments where, you want to slam your head against the wall. They never see the times when you're crying or when you have a mental breakdown, right? And I think that being that vulnerable, something that maybe not everyone is comfortable with, but some level of vulnerability and exposure is important for other people to see, so that they know, okay, you know what, she's going through it too, and look how she overcame it, so I can do it too. She can do it, I can do it. I think that it's important for us as entrepreneurs to tell our story more often, and that's why I really appreciate, even though you read our bios, that you gave us all an opportunity to share our stories, because I feel like in sharing that story, other people can find some common ground and be able to understand, okay, well, I can find some similarities here, so I'm able to maybe relate to her in this type of a way, or just keep it real and just stop with the people put so much out there that's just not what it's really about. And I think that we all owe it to the community and to others to share our experiences in a genuine and authentic way.
Thank you. Sandy or Chrissa, anything to add?
I can add that in terms of what I've seen for students in our programs and for myself personally, um, goes back to a bit of that self-care for social entrepreneurs. Their work and their personal identity is so intertwined that sometimes it's very hard to pull out and take care of oneself. And so people around us, friends and family, to be able to support self-care, community care is really important. Um, we all need to be supportive of people who are trying to like they're taking such a huge risk. And it's a risk in so many different ways that any place where you can see that you can help is appreciated. And, you know, I know personally I'm grateful to my friends and family who understand that I've decided to take this path. Even though they don't necessarily understand it, and a lot of people would never choose it for themselves, I just keep surrounding myself with people who, regardless of their understanding of it, can support me. And I think that is critical for every social entrepreneur. You need people around you to support you. And if you don't have it in the direct people you already have in your community, there are other communities that are there for you. And we've heard, you know, from all of us today, there are communities out there to support you.
Great, thank you. Sandy, any final words to add on this?
I'd say the same thing, self-care and having a proper support system in place and a network definitely is key. And as well, being able to see yourself in someone else, whether it's in the north or across the country, familiarity and similarity help reduce barriers. That's what I would encourage, is more networking across the country, whether it's north of 60 or south of 60. I think it's a great opportunity to share best practices, lessons learned, and now what, right? That's what I think.
Great, I think that's a perfect place to kind of tie up our conversation, because I think that, you know, we went on a journey today about starting with some of the barriers that we were seeing, and then talking about opportunities and what we can actually do. And this, to me, this really resonant theme of connection, of sharing, and how much that opens up for all of us, I think is a really good one to leave with today. So thank you to all of you for sharing your perspectives. I certainly really appreciate just having a chance to listen and chat with you. So
Thank
we're
you
going,
for having
oh yeah, of course. So just a few logistics for everyone as well who's still on the call. Following the webinar, we'll be posting a recording of this presentation on the OTF Knowledge Center. Tracy, if you're still there, would you like to share a few details on the Knowledge Center and what people can expect to find on there?
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'll just take a few seconds because we're just ending the webinar, but thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and for the panelists, all the to share your journeys. That was really rich and just really great conversation. So we don't want to leave it there. That's why we have a Knowledge Center. It's a platform that we have that is available to the community to engage in conversation. So Sandy, when you ended with that comment around we need to connect, and we need to network, we need to share what's happening, we actually have one way of doing it. It's not an answer, but it's one way that we have, and anyone can join it, and it's there for you to share resources and ideas. And I know you've already, Tamar, you talked about a book, of course, that you have, and Chrissa, you mentioned some research. And Sandy, I know you have some examples of social enterprises. They could all go on this the Knowledge Center under Prosperous People, or you'll notice when you get in there where it can where you can share the information. If you need any help in doing that, please get in touch. And it's an opportunity to discuss with others and to create kind of that community of practice, where we do have a community that's already engaged in discussion. In fact, we've got quite a bit of information on the Knowledge Center right now under Prosperous that relate to diversity and inclusion, as well as the research that's happening in the tech sector, in diversity in the incubators, across Ontario. And of course, Brookfield Institute is for Innovation and Entrepreneurship is also putting up their research. So we've got lots of different ways to engage and learn from each other. So thanks so much for participating, and thanks, Galen, for facilitating.
Of course. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks again, Sandy, Chrissa, and Tamar for taking the time to share your stories with us.
Thank you.